Hey y'all, Lisa Marriott here. Today we're going to be talking about water quality, and there's a lot that's going to be in your textbook with relation to the water and the groundwater and how everything kind of moves forward, but that's not what we're going to be talking about here. What we're going to be talking about right now in this video is about three things that I want you to kind of keep in the back of your head as you're reading the chapter. And the reason that we care about these is because they're current events and super important. So number one is we're going to be talking a little bit about the Deepwater Horizon. So that oil spill that was in the Gulf, this is, if you can even believe it, this is a wave that from Alabama and what it looked like way back in the day. Fortunately, some things were spilled, cleaned up, pardon me, but you still have some effects, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So when looking at Deepwater Horizon, they have some beautiful videos that are done on this website, and there's also some really interesting maps. So I'm going to pull one over right now. And so what you see here are two oil spills, one in the Gulf of Mexico, so this is your Deepwater Horizon right here. And if you click on the extent of this spill, which is here, you can see how big it is. And then if you zoom out a little bit, you can either look at lost recreational land use, or you can look at where oil's found on the beaches. So it's kind of a nice interactive map. We're not going to be going too deep, if at all, into down here, but oil spills happen and they make a difference. So the videos that are on the site are going to talk about what they did to clean things up and what the effects are. So you can look at the mangroves, which is pretty cool actually. Well, I wouldn't say cool. It's pretty devastating actually. And then you'll also have some other effects. And so one of the things that I want you to keep in mind as you look through is that their use of what are called dispersants. And so dispersants are, again, you know how much I love my chemistry. So BP used about 1.84 million gallons of dispersants. And all that did was take the oil that was sitting on the top, because remember, oil goes on top of water. And what it does is that it binds to that oil, so it's actually able to be falling into water. And there's a really beautiful video of how it actually looks like asphalt once it drops down. So that's one thing to keep in mind about, all right, so look at these dispersants. What are they actually made of? So is dumping all these gallons of dispersant, is that making things better or making things worse? So another thing to keep in mind, we've talked about this a little bit already, is the Dakota Access Pipeline. And things have, oil started flowing already. You can follow the conversations on NPR. There's also some blogs that are discussing it as well. But the issue here is, this is our environmental justice all over it. And so when you look at the timeline, for example, and again, this timeline is pulled directly from the NPR site. What I want you to notice is that, so here's our the order from Trump to expedite the review and approval process for the Dakota Access Pipeline. And what the problem is that you're kind of ignoring this environmental impact statement and soliciting public comments until February 20th. And you'll see that we're going to terminate this period and we're no longer going to do the environmental impact statement. So these are some problems, and unfortunately it's not working out very well, and I'm kind of disappointed. But oil's now flowing and they just keep getting shut down. So this is a story to kind of keep in mind and to look at what we know from history of what to predict based on previous events. The other thing that I think is going to be really important, and for whatever reason, there we go. So, all right, so the other thing to keep in mind that's really a positive spin is that in Norway, which has tons of money obtained because of oil shares and things of that sort. Oil shares is not the right word, but from bringing in oil from their country, is they're now divesting, so disinvesting, not investing anymore, pulling their money back from the companies that are behind Apple. And so that's a nice example of, like, all right, so how can we as a collective society reduce this and reduce the economics that these companies are getting from this? There's also another, this is a blog, so DeSmog is a blog, and they were talking about how it's going to replace the trains that are going to be doing things that could be perceived as a benefit. But then they start talking about how it's going to take the oil obtained from hydraulic fracking, or hydraulic fracturing, also known as fracking, and increase that. And so that kind of just, it brings in the back of my head of, all right, so what's the impact of fracking? And we're going to be talking about that as well. So fracking, and there's a beautiful video. So if you have time, go to this National Geographic. It's 2 minutes, and it shows exactly how it works. But essentially, they're taking water, mixing it with chemicals, injecting it into the rock, to break up the rock so they can then pull the oil back out of places that are typically hard to access. And there are known risks for fracking already. So the EPA has documented a lot of these. So it's stress on the groundwater and the surface water, contamination of these sources. Then there's also some air pollution. So it produces a ton of wastewater from this process. There are some myths. Those are covered here. So it's not just fracking creates earthquakes, and there's a one-to-one correlation there talking about that. That's one of the main ones that they talk about. And then they're also talking about some frequently asked questions that I found were really helpful. So if you are looking at earthquakes, and we've talked about this a little bit, is that, this is a recent earthquake map from the USGS, and we're typically used to seeing earthquakes on the West Coast, but now we're starting to see them quite a bit more in the Midwest, and they're hypothesizing that this is likely due to fracking. So this is an active area of research, so it's something you should definitely keep in mind as we're going through. But the part that I care about for class discussions is all about the chemicals. And you know how I feel about my chemicals, but they're talking about dozens to hundreds of chemicals being used in the fracking process. So if you go to this site and you pull it up, and so what chemicals are actually being used. So you have various acids, various biocides, things that help to break things down, things to help stabilize, things to prevent the corrosion of the materials. And then they have all sorts of things, and here's where it gets down to my part that I find really interesting, is then they start messing with the pH. And why do I care about the pH? I care about the pH because pH is everything, and that's what we're going to be talking about predominantly the most in class. So the reason that pH is the everything is that solubility matters in pH. We saw that when we were talking about toxicology, right? So like as things go through, if they're soluble in an acid, they're going to dissolve in your stomach, whereas if they're soluble in a more basic environment, they're going to dissolve and be absorbed more in your small intestine. So if you change the pH of things in the water quality, so what is going to happen? How can you start making predictions about what's going to happen for solubility of various components, toxins, and other things? So we're going to spend a lot of time there, but there's a lot to look through. I'm not expecting you to look through all of it, but it's pretty interesting. Have a great week.